And I'm joined now by two terrific guests on this front. My pal over at CNBC, the senior economics reporter Steve Liesman, and Diane Swonk, chief economist at KPMG, whose Twitter thread on housing sort of got my alarm bells ringing this morning, and which is, I'm so glad you could join us today, Diane. But Steve, let me start with you. And look, this is a case where voter sentiment about the economy and where the economy is headed are actually in sync, correct?
Potentially, yeah, to the extent that people are worried about a recession. It is a abiding concern of economists, forecasters, CEOs, Federal Reserve officials. Kind of interesting that such a small percentage think we're in one now. There's a lot of talk about, are we in one yet? But 59% think that's to come, which is not a very good number. And Chuck, I want to say you were spot on starting with housing because, you know, I've been doing this poll for 14 years, which is ridiculous to think about it. But nothing colors people's attitudes about the economy as does their views about housing. The 23% who think their home is going to decrease, that's the highest level since 2008. That's the financial crisis. And the percent who think their home is going to increase, just 32%. That's the lowest level since the pandemic. So I think you're right to focus on housing and the importance of that for people's attitudes on the economy.
Well, Diane, that is why you're here, because, look, gas prices may be the billboard people see. Boy, things are getting more expensive. But when it comes to sort of feeling, what is your financial feeling on financial security? The biggest check you write every month is either for rent or a mortgage. And this is where you come in. You were sounding the alarm bell. You're fearing that the housing market is crashing.
It is crashing. And, you know, what's really, it underscores is how it is. We've seen rapid rate hikes, not just rate hikes on mortgage rates. They've been rapid rate hikes. And that's even more destabilizing than just moving up rates. And I think it's something that the Fed has understated in their own views in terms of how rapidly it's taken a toll on the housing market. And what's interesting is we're seeing also some of the hottest markets in the country are now beginning to cool on prices despite still really constrained supplies. People aren't willing to sell out of those 3% mortgages that they locked into a year ago and put their houses on the market. And so we're not seeing the downward pressure on prices that you would normally see from a surge in an excess supply of people trying to sell homes. You're seeing it from the fact that houses are just unaffordable.
So we're in this weird period on housing, Diane, where we still have a housing crunch in this country. So that's also causing some price pressure. Get consumer-y here, sort of consumer help here for a minute. If you're thinking about buying a home, you save some money, you were thinking about buying a home, I take it this is about the worst time, or is it going to get worse and you better just jump in when you can?
Well, you know, I think it is unfortunately a bad time at the moment, and it is going to get worse. It will eventually get better, but we've got to get through a very rough time before we get there. And that's the hard part. And of course, the flip side of this is, you know, it does also increase demand for rentals. And so even though rents on the margin have been coming down, many people are paying more for rents, and it's forcing them to stay when they would like to buy a home. So it's very difficult. But I think what's really important about what's going on is we've yet to see national housing prices decline. And I think next year we will see them decline by a double-digit rate. Now, it's not the housing bust. It's not the subprime crisis. We've still got skin in the game. But those are important wealth effects for every household out there. And so if you're not feeling as good about the value of your home, you're not going to be as willing to dip into savings, which you've already dipped into quite a bit if you're a middle income or lower household. It's all that excess saving is piled up in the very wealthy households. That doesn't keep the economy going, and it doesn't keep very many people happy.
You know, Steve, I feel like the Fed has this thankless job. They only have one tool, and they're going to keep pounding it and pounding it and pounding it. They're going to, and I understand it from an economist point of view, but it seems as if there's some things that they haven't been able to account for. We're still spending money. We're still consuming. We're a consumption economy. What's happening in housing, do you think it's at all going to make the Fed rethink this next interest rate hike?
I don't. And just a little pushback on my good friend and pal Diane Swonk on this one issue. People still have considerable gains in their homes, and we haven't really seen a big decline. It is interesting, Chuck, there's been some research that shows people really know what their house is worth at any one moment.
Yeah, go to Zillow.
And
Zillow tells you all the time.
Yeah. You can go to Zillow, but people also have it in their brains because they know what's going on in their neighborhood. It's something they really do know and pay attention to. I think what's happening in housing right now is a reason for consumer caution, but not yet panic. We haven't had a big, as Diane said, a big housing crisis or decline in prices as we've had in the past. The Fed wants to see it cool off, in part because, Chuck, this is low-hanging fruit. Housing is such a big part of the CPI that if they can get some help there on housing prices, it'll help bring down the whole CPI in a way that would reduce inflation overall.
And I want to let viewers know, we just put up a poll number that you may have said, hey, you just put that up. We had bad numbers the first time. Those were the corrected numbers on the number of people who expect their value of their home to increase, decrease, and stay the same. Diane, you were saying that this is not 2008, 2009. Is part of that because people have money and they're not going to have to dump their house essentially to pay a debt?
Well, it's because of a lot of things. First of all, I don't expect to see the kind of rise in unemployment that we saw, which accelerated foreclosures. But you're right. They also don't have to dump their house to keep up with their mortgage. I mean, what we saw in the lead up to the subprime crisis was people had to have an appreciating home value at an accelerated rate. As home values slowed down and were still rising, that wasn't enough to refinance and keep them in their homes. So it was a really crazy lending environment that we just don't have right now. People have equity in their homes. They have value in their homes. What I meant with Steve, and he's right, it takes a while. There's a lag. We've already seen that, purchases of big ticket household durables, of furniture, appliances, everything you fill a home with, all the repairs, all the remodeling that goes on, that's begun to come off. And some of it's come off. This is a pandemic-induced housing bubble that's deflating now, and I think it's important to keep that in context. But as the value of homes fall, and I do think we're going to see a double-digit decline next year, that will take off of the wealth effects and reverse, and people have already tapped into their savings, and that's when you're going to see a bigger correction in consumer spending. So it's not that we're there yet, we're clearly not, but some of the hottest markets have already begun to cool, and that's just the beginning, the tip of the iceberg, as they say.
Steve,
unfortunately for this, the good news is it's not the subprime crisis at all.
Let's be a little Pollyannish here and assume that the voter concerns about the cost of inflation actually drive lawmakers post-election to try to do something. What is the something that the business community wants to have? Is it increase the labor supply? Is it pay down the debt? What is something that they would like to see Washington do post-election that could actually help soften this landing?
Chuck, we do a survey of economists and fund managers, a separate survey, a smaller group, of course, and we've asked exactly that question. What else should be done here? And I don't know if you want to play 20 questions here, but I'll tell you right off, the number one answer, 2 surveys in a row, is to increase legal immigration. You go back to the Trump administration, as a matter of policy, they reduced legal immigration. That was brought to a halt during the pandemic. The Biden administration was very slow opening up the embassies, in part because of the pandemic. We keep getting this idea that and I'm not talking about illegal immigration. That's a separate hotbed issue. But the idea being of opening up the doors for people to come in more legally and to fill the jobs that we have available in this country. One other thing, Chuck, if you don't mind, real quickly, you asked me at the top of the show how the reality comports with the poll of the economy. One thing the Biden administration has going for it is this really low unemployment rate. And yet, again, the Republicans have a double-digit lead in our poll on which party is best for creating jobs. So I guess when the Americans put a pox on your house, they do it on the entire house.
Diane, it was funny on the illegal immigration. You said the one silver lining in the housing industry is there may not be a lot of layoffs because they were having trouble finding labor, right?
Exactly, and this is a little bit unfair because I answer that same poll that Steve puts out. So I'm one of the ones who has said that. But part of the balance in the labor market, is having one job for one worker, not 2 job openings for one worker, or 1.7 as we saw in August. And having that balance allows real wages to go up faster than inflation. That's what we want. And I think that's what's really been missing in this equation is understanding the nuance in the labor market and how do we get to that balance.
Nuance.
But immigration has been
nuance.
missing.
That's so nuance and context. Washington doesn't do nuance and context, Diane. You know that. Steve Liesman, Diane Swonk, thank you for getting us started.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.